There you go.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Dan Bates, President and CEO of the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we are thrilled you could join us this morning on Coffee and Conversations. We will be getting to our guest speaker in just a moment, but you're in for some very interesting information. People may not think that COBRA is exciting, but it's something that you need to know. So if you're an employer, you need to know how things have changed. Especially with the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. A lot of HR and personnel things have kind of been rewritten. So like I always say, ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to anything with your employees. It's information that you need to know. So we will get to John Kirk from Graydon in just a moment. You know who I am. We're going to do self-introductions. So I guess we're turning that over to Laura.
Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us today. I'm Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber. So we will just go around. Please tell me your name and what company you're with. Zach, we will start with you.
Good morning. I'm Zach Bohannon, the Butler County Field Representative for Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio's 8th District.
Glad to have you with us today. Steve.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Steve Wayne. I'm the Assistant Director of Employer Relations for Miami University Regionals. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you with us today. Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy O'Neill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
And Tiffany.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany Grubb with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
All right, John, we will let you take it away and educate us on all the important things with COBRA.
All righty. Well, thanks for having me. One of these days we'll get to do all these again in person. My name is John Kirk. I'm an attorney at Graydon. I've been practicing about, well, next year will be 20 years, always in benefits. I started my first, beginning my career at the U.S. Department of Labor, being the guy that would knock on your door and investigate you for benefits issues. So, when Dan was saying that, there's no excuse, ignorance is no excuse for HR and your employees, he's very right. I didn't know was never a really good answer when I'd come knock on your door. I did it wrong. You're allowed to say that, but at least you have to say you tried. So today we're going to talk about COBRA and the COBRA subsidies. For some of you that have been in this for a while, you remember we had that subsidy back in 2009. During the last big downturn. This is a little similar. It's actually a little more generous, and it is a little more complicated in a few ways. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or sort of just wave your hand and get somebody's attention and it'll stop me. I will share the slides after this, so they'll be available for everybody. Away we go. All right, that's me, just in case for some reason you're not watching me. American Rescue Plan Act, signed on March 11th, provides subsidies. The official ways eligible individuals an opportunity to receive assistance with COBRA premiums. So it provides 100% of the cost as a premium subsidy. But the different thing is it also allows individuals who may have waived coverage or never responded or even dropped potentially a second chance to elect COBRA. So you had someone who was on COBRA, they're eligible, they waived. We now have to send them another letter and then give them an opportunity to re-elect COBRA for free under the premium assistance. So which plans are required to offer the subsidy? Everybody that's under federal COBRA, any public plans under the Public Health Plans Act, and all the small plans. So everybody that was sort of always exempt from COBRA and you just had to worry about Ohio or Kentucky or Indiana, what we call mini COBRA, so fewer than 20 employees, you have to offer the subsidy as well. So a lot of employers, especially those small employers, also always sort of ignored COBRA. Ignored. I don't have to worry about that. It's for the big guys, we'll say. Well, this subsidy and all the notice requirements apply to the state continuation plans as well. It also includes your medical, dental, and vision. However, if you have a health FSA, you don't have to worry about that. So that makes it a little easier, so we don't have to worry about calculating how much is in the FSA or how much to offer in the FSA. It's more your traditional, we'll say, health plans. So who's an assistant eligible individuals, or AEIs, as they say in all of the guidance. So it's someone who's lost health plan coverage due to an involuntary termination, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In fact, they just released guidance last week to sort of expand on what that means for everybody, or a reduction in hours, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. Still in their maximum continuation period, so they're still within their 18 months. Or if you're in Ohio and you're a small plan, you're still within your 12 months of COBRA continuation for state coverage. And this is a big one, and one that's going to need a little policing. We hope our employees are always honest with us, or our former employees are honest with us. But this one may need a little policing because it's someone who's not eligible for other group health plan coverage or Medicare. So you have to have lost your coverage for a reason, still be in your COBRA period, and not be eligible for a spouse's plan, Medicare, Medicaid, anything like that, or a new employer, because as soon as you get other coverage, you lose the subsidy and lose the ability to be on our last plan. So an involuntary termination, we have layoffs count, a RIF counts, a reduction in force, expiration of a contract, terminations for cause. All of those are considered involuntary. For layoffs or reduction in force, even if the employee sort of has a choice and you say, hey, listen, we're taking volunteers for layoffs, if you will. Even though they volunteered to be laid off, it's still considered an involuntary termination. Retirement, and this is the guidance that just came out. If you're going around and you're having to do a reduction in force and you're offering a voluntary retirement buyout, and you say, listen, you guys either got to be fired or you need to retire and take the buyout. If they volunteer to take the buyout, the early retirement, that counts as an involuntary termination as well. Expiration of a contract, if the employee is working, say, on a 2-year contract and 2 years is up and you had no intention of renewing it, it was just it was a 2-year project's over, they're gone, that's not involuntary. However, if it was, if they're working on a year-to-year contract and you generally renew the contract each year, and at the end you just decide not to renew it, that can be considered voluntary. So the facts and circumstances are going to have to play into some of these situations where it's not completely clear cut on what happened. Terminations for cause, pretty easy. They still get offered unless it's for gross misconduct. So if it's gross misconduct, and that's where I'd say you need to talk to your labor lawyer if you're deciding that we're not going to offer COBRA for gross misconduct, because that gets into all kinds of things. But generally, if it's termination for cause, lying, cheating, stealing, theft, general for cause type things, it's still involuntary. We still have to offer the subsidy, unfortunately. So that's going to be one of the areas where there's going to be a lot, I think, of consternation on the employer side, trying to figure out, well, it was a RIF, but they volunteered, and trying to figure out what is the circumstances to make sure it fits and to make sure we offer that subsidy to everybody. A lot of people are taking the approach where they're just going to offer the subsidy to everyone unless it's blatantly, in their opinion, and probably check with counsel, that it was gross misconduct, or it was completely voluntary, and say, you know what, I got a new job, I'm leaving, clearly a voluntary termination, separation for service. So unless it's very clearly voluntary or very clearly gross misconduct, a lot of employers are sort of just going for the blanket, everybody gets the subsidy. Reduction in hours, other way you can qualify. Easiest one, switching from full-time to part-time. Whether that's voluntary or not, if they drop their hours and they lose their health coverage or dental or vision, they would be eligible for the subsidy. A leave of absence, so they go on some sort of leave of absence where their hours are going to reduce, even if it's voluntary, so even if it's medical leave of absence, some sort of disability, or some sort of sabbatical under your company plan, they could qualify. A labor strike. So if you're unionized and employees go on strike, so obviously their hours are reduced, still become eligible for the subsidy and COBRA in that situation. A lot of employers are not going to like the fact that people are going on strike and now we're paying 100% of their COBRA, but the Department of Labor wrote these, so we always know generally which side they sort of support for a lot of things. So who isn't included? People that voluntarily left. Hey, I got a new job, or I just don't like working here. Individuals added due to special enrollment. So, if they're added, birth, adoption, those sorts of things, that doesn't allow them in there. Death, divorce, or aging out. So a kid turns 27, ages off the plan. Those are not considered involuntary terminations. Even though death is pretty involuntary, those are not involuntary terminations, so they don't qualify. Domestic partners. So these would be unmarried cohabitating people who meet your domestic partner definition, but are not married. If one of those people leaves the plan for whatever reason, they don't qualify for the subsidy either. So this is the only sort of saving grace for your small plans, your 20 or fewer, is everybody else has to give you a second election opportunity, and I have some examples here. I'll show this continuation plan. So your smaller plans under Ohio state law. If someone has waived previously, we don't have to go back and offer them this again. Really, the reason being is understand that it's frankly an administrative burden to have to then track down all these former employees from the last year or so to then offer them COBRA. That really the employer doesn't have a whole lot to do with. This is more the insurance company in these state plans, these smaller plans for COBRA. And so they said, all right, you don't have to go out and track them down for this second election opportunity if you're a small plan. Everybody's got more than 20. You have to offer a second election opportunity. Even if they dropped, so they had COBRA, they dropped for whatever reason, you still have to track them down and offer them an opportunity to re-enroll for the subsidy. You send the notice out, they have 60 days to newly elect to jump on the plan. Now, if someone's not on COBRA, so we've sent them an election, they're not enrolled currently, we send them this new election notification. They said, yeah, I want to join. It's free. Why not? So they have to complete a request. There's actually part of the form that says, yes, I want to be treated as an assistance eligible individual. So they have to opt in to getting the subsidy. Now, on the forms, there's new COBRA forms, there's new notices you have to send out. It's pretty clear where to, it's not like they're hiding the ball. If they miss the 60 days, there are no extensions. So, it's very clear in the notice. You have 60, you received it, you have 60 days to elect and get this back to us. If you don't, then you do not get it. So, for the employers, what do we have to do? We have to always offer the coverage that they were enrolled when they terminated. So if they were in, the PPO, the middle grade, say PPO plan, and when they terminated 8 months ago, we still have to offer them the ability to get into that plan. And if they were in the bare bones high deductible plan, that we offer to get in. However, employers may, you don't have to, but you are permitted to allow employees to change their plans. As part of the new rule is you can let them change plans if there's a plan that has a lower premium than the plan they were in before. So before they're in the top of the line PPO, and they say, hey, listen, circumstances have changed. I'd rather be in the high deductible, or I'd rather be in something cheaper. We can allow them to do that if you'd like. So it has to be lower cost premium than what they were originally in, a plan that's offered to other employees. So you can't come up with some sort of special plan that's not really offered to your general population. It has to be a plan that everybody else at the company can get. And it's not limited benefits. So it's not just dental vision. They can't say, hey, I know I was in medical and dental and vision before, or I was just in medical. Yeah, I just want to switch to just dental or just vision. We can't let them do that. But we can't let them switch to low cost plans of the type they were in before. So how much is the subsidy? It is 100% of the amount the employee is required to pay. So as we all know, in COBRA, we're generally allowed to charge 102%. So we can charge 100% of the premium plus the 2% administration charge. So the employee gets a subsidy for that full amount. We can't charge them anything. So if we generally charged 102%, well, the subsidy is for 102%. So, this really is free health coverage for the people that qualify for the subsidy. There's no ability for us to really charge them anything. So the subsidy, how long does it last? Well, it lasts from April, this past month, April 1st through the end of September. So it's a short subsidy, but it's still free for all those months. Doesn't extend your maximum period. So if your 18 months is ending in May, well, the best you could do is you get April and May coverage. If your coverage ended in April, you only got April. It doesn't tack on any additional months. It's just if you happen to be eligible for COBRA from April through September, you can get the subsidy. And it terms early if they become eligible for any other coverage. So if spouse's plan, other employees plan, Medicare, Medicaid, any other kind of coverage will terminate the subsidy because it'll terminate the coverage as well. So we have the first example. So we have an employee who was fired. We fired them on New Year's Eve for poor performance. They started celebrating the new year a little early. We had to terminate them. But from April through June, they'd be eligible for the subsidy because their COBRA ends on June. So they had their 18 months. Actually, I should be 2019. They had their 18 months of COBRA. We terminate them, and so they would get for just April, May, and June. Scenario 2, we have someone who was laid off this past January. They elected COBRA on February 1st. So February and March, they would have to pay their full cost, or 102%. April through September, they get it free, they get their subsidy. And then starting in October, they'd have to start paying 100% again. So that's part of these notices we're going to have to send out, sort of explaining all of this to the employees. There's a notice saying, hey, you're getting the subsidy. There's a notice that we have to send your subsidies about the end. And so there's a lot of sort of employer requirements. And hopefully you're working with a COBRA vendor who can help with a lot of those things. If you're doing COBRA by yourself, you're brave. COBRA is one of those things that I would say it's not hard, but it's expensive if you mess it up. So there are templated notices. The Department of Labor has provided sample notices of all the new requirements. They're on the Department of Labor's website. So if you're doing COBRA yourself and you haven't pulled those up, you need to pull those up immediately and start using those for your COBRA notices and getting them to those people who may still be eligible, especially for April and May that we're already in. If you're using a vendor, just check with your COBRA vendor to make sure they're also getting these notices out. And it's probably going to involve some sort of using some more census data, because especially as we send those second notifications out to people who may have waived, sometimes they drop out of the COBRA vendor system. But HR still track and still knows who those are. So you may need to help update your vendor to find those people that may have waived COBRA, but now we have to offer them a second bite at the apple. We already talked about disqualified for other coverage. So our notification requirements, we have to revise our sort of general notice to just to say, hey, by the way, the premiums are available. You all remember when we revised our notices for the marketplace exchanges, for the federal health care exchanges, sort of added a paragraph saying, hey, by the way, the exchanges exist and may be cheaper. There's similar language here where it's, oh, by the way, these premiums exist and you can elect in to get the premium assistance for this period of time. It provides, there's a notice of the extended election period that, hey, now you have an ability to get that extra bite at the apple to enroll. There's a notice of the subsidy expiration. So they do elect, they're getting their subsidy. They're moving toward the end. So generally probably around September ish is when that notice will go out. So you've got, another month. It ends at the end of September, maybe middle of August, start sending that out. And it's letting them know your subsidy is going to end. And starting October 1st, you're going to have to pay the full premiums again for your coverage. So our general notice is we have the model provided by the Department of Labor. Given to qualified beneficiaries who have qualifying life events, I'm a lawyer, we love acronyms, especially an ERISA lawyer, now until September 30th. So anybody that terms until September 30th gets this notice. And it should have has a summary of the premium assistance form. So essentially it's a packet with everything the employee needs to know what the assistance is, sign up for it, and elect it. So there's also an alternative notice for the state continuation. So this goes out to people who terminate from the small plans. And you follow the state guidelines. So just like you're doing today for COBRA, where you have to sit for mini COBRA, we send out that notice to your employees when they terminate. There is a notice for them as well. Talk to your insurance company. Sometimes the insurance company will send some of these notices for the smaller plans. So they may be doing it. Otherwise, you, the employer, needs to make sure you're doing it and sending out that notice. So we have some good timing for hopefully those on the call and those who watch this later, watch it before May 31st, because that is the deadline to send out the extended election notice. So that's the deadline to send out the notice. It says, dear former employee, you may have waived coverage, you may have dropped coverage, but now you have the ability to re-elect for April through September. Actually for however long they want, as long as they have some of their 18 months remaining, but at least get their premium subsidy for that period of time. So it's anybody who lost coverage on or after November 1st, 2019. The reason why it's November 1, 2019, that would give someone coverage for 18 months through April. So they will have gotten 1 month of the subsidy. And it's regardless of whether they previously enrolled in COBRA. So we mailed them the COBRA notices when they terminated, and it's crickets. We heard nothing. They affirmatively waived. Anybody who terminated that was COBRA eligible when they terminated, we have to send this notice to them, letting them know there's the opportunity to re-enroll. So for an employer with a lot of turnover, a lot of turnover with people who are enrolled in benefits, that's potentially a lot of notices we now have to send out to and former employees, letting them know about this. And frankly, it's a lot of potential claims are going to potentially jump back on our plan because it's free. I mean, it's free health insurance for several months. So everybody gets a second bite of the apple. There may be a gap in coverage, very well. I mean, if they dropped back in, or they didn't take it back in December, well, they'd have, they had employer coverage up to the day they terminated, then they have no coverage, and then they pick up coverage again in April through September. So there's going to be people with gaps in coverage. It's not retroactive, the subsidy. You just start it when they elect it for April. Again, this extended election, this extra, does not apply to small employers who have who use mini COBRA. So employees must take action. They must be treated, they must request to be treated as eligible for the subsidy. Employee cannot be required to pay the premium if approved. I mean, it's the subsidy, so it's not like they pay and they get reimbursed. It's not paid to the employee. The employer pays the premium. The health insurance company pays the premium. It does not go to the employees at all. It's not a reimbursement. It's not any kind of grant. It is just you don't pay for those months, April through September, that you've elected coverage. Some additional information for our notices. We need something to establish eligibility. So we'll have to figure out, their name, address, phone number of the plan administrator, description of the election period. Most of these will be fairly boilerplate. Your COBRA vendor or the templates have places to fill in this information. The key one here is you need to double check what you're sending out, especially if you're using a vendor and they sort of have template forms you're using. The employer, need to decide, are we going to allow people to change their health plan options? Are we going to allow them to potentially elect a cheaper plan than what they were in when they left? And if we are, we need to make sure that language is in the notice. But if we're not going to, and it seems most employers, at least the ones I've talked to, probably aren't going to allow that because it's just one more administrative hiccup they have to deal with. A lot of them say, we're not going to allow you to change. You can take the plan you're in before, just like normal COBRA. But they want to make sure that language is not in the forms we send out. Because the last thing we want is to say, hey, we're not allowing it, and then everyone gets a COBRA notice that says, oh, by the way, you can elect a cheaper plan. The COBRA Premium Assistance Summary, which is part of the template Department of Labor documents they've put out, has all of those requirements in there. Again, if you're doing it yourself, there might be some blanks you have to fill in. If you're using the vendor, hopefully they're doing some sort of form, mail merge, where they can add that information in there. So the notice that you're expiring, I've signed up for the notice. I'm getting my free health insurance for a few months. We now have to send you a notice 15 to 45 days before the subsidy ends. I think as a best practice, I think 15 is a little short to give them 2 weeks notice that their coverage is ending, even though they've probably gotten other notices about it. Most people, I think, are aiming for about 45 to 30 days beforehand to send this notice out to tell them, hey, it's expiring. You're going to start paying the premiums beyond that. So it has the actual subsidy date, which for most people will probably be September 30. And then also reminding them that they're still eligible for coverage beyond that, if they are. So if they have 18 months of coverage and they got 7 months left after September, just reminding them, by the way, you have another 7 months of coverage, but you just have to pay for it. It's not required for the state continuation coverage, mainly because that is the state coverage is between the insurance company and the employee, and the insurance company is taking care of some of that. Not required for individuals eligible for other coverage. So we find out employee who was getting our premium has got a new job. And the new job starts on September 1st. Well, their coverage is going to end in August. We don't have to send them a notice telling them their coverage is going to end in August. We can just, at that point, turn it off because we know they have other coverage. And again, the DOL has provided models for that. Notification of eligibility for other coverage. The end individuals need to tell us. The government's actually has put a penalty on this. So if you get other coverage and don't tell your former employer from whom you're getting COBRA, there's a $250 penalty. Now, how they're going to track them down, how they're going to assess it, I assume it will be the employer turning them into the DOL. But there is a $250 penalty for not, for receiving the premium assistance when you really have other coverage. It's actually, the penalty is if it's fraudulent. So if they're clearly, if they just forgot, there's a $250 penalty, which may or may not get waived by the DOL. If we find out that they knew they were supposed to tell you and they just didn't because they wanted to continue the free coverage, and it's fraudulent, it's the greater of $250 or 110% of the subsidy provided. So, if most people's
John, we've lost your sound. It was broken and now it's gone completely. Did everybody else lose sound, John's sound too? Okay. So it wasn't just me.
Looks like that one muted. Maybe try to there you go.
You got me? You got me?
Yes.
All right.
Probably
Is
going
there
to be an echo.
Well, is that better?
Yes.
So I have no idea what happened, but I just turned all the sound off in the office. We'll just go by phone. Hey, we got an extra participant. So notice distribution rules, same as they were before. We just, ordinary course of business, we just send our COBRA notice out just like always have. There's no relief on timing. So even though we have these new notices and we have to redo some of our general COBRA notices, we don't get any breaks. The government didn't give us any extra time to comply with this. It's just, we have to hit the ground running. So penalty, we have a penalty if the employee doesn't tell us they have other coverage, but we also have penalties if we, the employer, don't comply with all these new requirements. One, it's a $100 per day or $200 per family for failure to provide the notices. So again, that's per day. So that, if we forget to send this or we don't send this, that can get fairly expensive, especially if there's a lot of people we have missed. They're very graciously limited to $500,000 per year. So don't worry, employers, the worst they can get you for is $500,000. We can negotiate that if and I have negotiated penalties like that, but they always, they want their cut, and they're not going to be super friendly to this. Maybe won't give you the full max. If you intentionally don't send it, so if you're just willful, so it's due, and you say, you know what, I'm not doing it. I'm not giving those employees, their former employees, they're terrible people. I'm not giving them any opportunity to get free COBRA. That there is no cap. They will go after you for every dime they can possibly get from you at that point. And as always, there's additional civil penalties can apply because believe me, having been at work at the DOL and been an investigator there, if they find you for neglect or willful neglect, they at that point will open up an audit on everything they can possibly open an audit on, and just stay with you for the next 18 to 24 months to find every rock and turn every rock over. Because if you're intentionally ignoring this rule, the odds are you've intentionally ignored a lot of other labor rules, and then they'll probably call their friends at the IRS to come after you as well. So one reason we do these educations is to remind everybody, even if you mess it up, even if you do it poorly, that's okay. It's not doing it that gets you in trouble. So COBRA, if we remember, we had some guidance when all this happened under the national emergency, where we had COBRA, we had an extended deadline to elect COBRA. We had a year or 6 days following the national emergency for payments and elections. Those still apply. So we have some people who may have been a year and haven't elected COBRA, that they could still be in that gap, and they still could elect COBRA all the way back to forever, as long as they write us the check for that retroactive period. So the relief does not apply to subsidy election periods. They don't get an extra year to elect the subsidy. That is within, it has to be within 60 days. But it doesn't shorten the COVID relief. So we, in theory, could have people who elect for April through September, and then may actually be able to elect later, all the way back to March under the election relief. I don't think that's going to happen. It's more sort of what ERISA nerds think of all the horrible problems that could happen, and how everything sort of meshes together. But and we haven't really figured out if there's any way to game the system on that, or if there's any real benefit to the employees. But in theory, it could happen. So what we have is this scenario: we have employee was fired in 21 and received their COBRA notice. They didn't elect. They get their notice in May saying, hey, by the way, you can have a second bite of the apple. So they have until June 29th to elect COBRA, and they can either pick 1/1/21 or 4/1/21, because they had the extra time to elect under the COVID relief. So if they pick 1/1/21, they're going to have to write us a check for January to April, and in April they get the assistance. Or they can have until the earlier of March 1, or 6 days following the end of the election period, to elect back to 1/1, but they don't get subsidized coverage if they elect after June. Again, this is one of those areas where call your benefits lawyer or your labor lawyer if you end up in one of these weird situations like this, just to make sure you're doing it right. We've had a few people elect COBRA late, but that was before any of this. None of us have really seen this one yet. And part of it's because those second bite of the apple letters haven't gone out. It won't go out until the end of this month. So they're just going out now. So that's where we may see some of this get triggered with these people who may have potentially delayed electing COBRA. I don't know how often it's going to happen. I mean, that's a fairly sizable check, 102% of your premium to write at one time. Because remember, once you elect it, you got to pay within 45 days. And so, I don't know, maybe if they got some sort of hit the lottery kind of thing in between and decided now they want health coverage, you might see it. But there are these sort of weird quirks with the COVID relief extensions and the ARPA subsidy. All right, so how do you, the employer, get your credit? You know, I'm now providing subsidized healthcare to the employees. So how do I get this? Well, it's a credit against the Medicare hospital tax. It's a refundable credit. It's likely taken on the Form 941. The IRS hasn't said definitively what they're going to do, but that's where we expect it. That's where other things, that's where it happened in the past. We'll expect that Form 941 to come out with the credit. So it's refundable, which means if you've paid some tax and your credit ends up being more, you'll get your money back. You'll get your money back from the IRS. I don't know how long that will take, but eventually there'll be a check in the mail from the IRS for your refundable credit. Who gets the credit? Well, if it's a multi-employer plan, the plan. If it's a self-insured plan, subject to COBRA or self-funded, the employer gets it. If you're in the state continuation plans, it's probably coming back to the insurer because they're the ones really paying that amount rather than the employer. If you're in a MIWA, so a multi-employer welfare arrangement, we're not really sure where that money comes back to. The IRS and the DO haven't gotten together and told us on that one yet. We think it's going to come back pro rata to the participants or participating employers, but we're not sure in a MIWA. So action items for employers. One, figure out who's eligible for the subsidy. So that's going to be going back and looking through your census data, see who terminated since November of 19 to be eligible for this. So we have to figure out who all those people are. Our COBRA vendor may know, they should have a record, but I don't know how often they sort of purge their records, as the years, 2 years, whatever it is. It may be after the 18 months is gone, or maybe after the election period originally happened. So figure out who those people are that we need to send notices to. Next, we need to modify our current COBRA notices, either getting the template or just taking the language out of the template and putting it in a current notice. That's for our election notices and the notice of COBRA availability. Review the notices, compare them to the templates issued. Again, your COBRA vendor should be doing that or should have already done that. If you're doing it yourself, these are some steps you should take. Talk to your benefits lawyer if you have questions to make sure you're getting it all right. Because we don't want any of those penalties to happen, unnecessarily. Revisions should be fair. They're fairly straightforward, but you want to be safe. So employers decide if you're going to permit people to elect a less expensive option. That's a big one because that changes the language in some of those notices if they're permitted to elect a less expensive option. And we just want to double check our vendor or us didn't actually drop that language in if we don't need to, and vice versa. Talk to your COBRA vendor, just make sure they're sending the notices, or are you sending the notices? Hopefully they're not charging you extra for that, since it's a change in law, but you never know. So I am aware of some of my clients who, the vendor wanted, more than they wanted to pay. So they're actually sending the notices and then using the COBRA vendor once people elect. So there's different options. The easiest way is just let the COBRA vendor do it. But that, your mileage may vary on that. So lastly, we have refund April and May premiums. So if someone, we're sending this notice out potentially the end of this month, so this week, we send it out, they get it and they go, oh yeah, I would like to re-enroll in the coverage that I didn't drop or whatever previously. And they do. Well, it's back to April 1st. And so we'd have to actually refund them the April and May premiums. So if they're already, if they're already paying, if someone's already paid April, you give it back to them. If you've already paid May, you give it back to them. I think a lot of the COBRA vendors caught this because the guidance was out before April. So they should have sort of not charged employees who were in COBRA at the time, but you never know. So that's one thing you're gonna have to check and confirm with your vendor or internally if you're doing COBRA yourself. Is there anybody that's on COBRA that we charged for April or May that now we need to give the money back? A lot of people aren't actually cutting refund checks. What they're doing is sort of asking the employee. Some are asking, do you want it now or do you want to supply a credit to your account for after September, since you've already paid? And some are just cutting the check. That again, that's sort of how you want to do it. I think cutting the check's probably easiest, just because then you don't have to worry about carrying over credits and all these sorts of things. But it also depends on how many checks that means you have to cut. If it's 2, that's one thing. If it's 200, your payroll department may actually hate you. So that one, again, internally trying to figure that one out. And that's all I have. I apologize for the technical snafu. I'm not exactly sure what happened there because everything on my side looked good. Anybody have any questions?
John, I do. I had 3 questions I put in the chat box, 2 of which you've already answered.
Okay.
But the third one is, for the expiration of contract, does that include grant-funded individuals working for a nonprofit?
So they're on a grant, and the grant says, "Hey, we'll fund this employee's salary for 1 year," kind of thing.
Yeah, and maybe it's been renewed for 4 or 5 years or something.
Yes, it would, but it's going to depend on if it's routinely renewed, and we decide we're not going to renew it. The employee says, "I don't want to renew it." Well, that's probably voluntary. If you don't get the grant, that's probably involuntary. And if it's more the employer and the employee sort of just come to an agreement, hey, maybe the project's done, maybe whatever we were funding this for, it's sort of run its natural course. That
Right.
one's probably not going to qualify. So I think there's a couple different scenarios there, depending on the reason we don't renew that grant. Or that grant contract, grant funded contract. I know that was a really lawyerly answer. That sort of
because a lot of nonprofits operate with grant funded employees for specific projects. So I guess it would be non-voluntary then if they applied for the grant routinely and then all of a sudden the grant is no longer granted.
I think that one's very clear cut. That'd be involuntary.
Okay.
If the grant money is just not there anymore, everybody was wanting to work and we can't fund you anymore. I think that's clearly involuntary. I think it's more if everybody wanted to continue, the money's there, but we decide to terminate that person for some other reason.
So the nonprofit that didn't get the grant could have to continue to pay then the COBRA premiums
Yes.
out of a source that they hadn't anticipated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if they're a small nonprofit, so fewer than 20 employees, really that money's gonna come from the insurance company.
Okay.
Because in that world, the COBRA money goes straight to the insurance company for the small plans. So they're probably not out of pocket. If they have more than 20 employees, yeah, they're now on the hook for a COBRA premium that they had not budgeted for.
Okay.
For at least these several months.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, I had a question. What do you see as, or what do you foresee maybe as the most common challenge or possible blind spot for these COBRA subsidies as it relates to what was recently signed in the American Rescue Plan Act? Do you see any potential blind spots, challenges, things that might keep coming up again?
I think the biggest challenge for employers is tracking down all these people who terminated all the way back to 2019. If you're a smaller employer and you have low turnover, probably not a big deal. You remember the 3 people you lost in the last year, But if you're a larger employer and you had a significant RIF, or you had some layoffs and some people came back, some didn't, I think that becomes much more challenging, especially if some of those separations involved your HR department. So if you've lost some of your institutional knowledge and now you got to go back and track down all these people who may have terminated a year and a half ago, I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for most employers, especially with the sort of this fear of these penalties over your head from the Department of Labor if you don't send these notices out. So I do hope, if they're working with a good COBRA vendor, hopefully some of that knowledge is there. But I think that's going to be the hardest and most administratively burdensome part of this. The extra notices, it's always a pain to send more mail and more paper out, but employers, I think, are sort of in the habit of sending those notices out and different notices out. And there's electronic means, those sorts of things that they can do it. I think it's hard enough keeping an address for an employee that is actually showing up to work. Who knows what addresses we have a year later, especially with the sort of the transitions that COVID forced on us. As people have moved back home, moved different places, changed departments. That's going to be, I think that's going to be the hardest part. Anybody else? All right. Hey, 9:54. We're ending slightly early. That's good.
Well, sounds like you did an amazing job, John. Thank you very much for being with us today. If anybody else has questions, we will have John's contact info. You can contact him directly. We will be posting this on Facebook and on YouTube. So definitely feel free to ask, contact John for questions after you watch. We'll be back for Coffee and Conversation on Tuesday, June 8th at 9 a.m. Our guest is Matt Dekovitz with the Butler County Regional Transit Authority. If you haven't checked out what the Butler County RTA is doing, they have a wide variety of services. They have an amazing app. You can schedule trips out the time, or you can schedule it up to 5 minutes before you're ready to leave. So they have a lot of services, and we're excited to hear about everything they're going to share with us that day. So anybody have any last minute questions for John?
I don't have a question, but I feel, John, this was great information. And I know that Nick had sent us a couple links before for information. So I've asked Tiffany and Laura to kind of bundle that, and we're going to send that out on our e-newsletter because this is kind of information that people don't know they need. And we don't want them to get snagged when the guy knocks on the door and they say, geez, I had no idea. So I think
exactly right.
Really valuable presentation. So we want to make sure that we send it out so that people can't say they didn't know.
Well, I already told Laura I'll send her the slides, and you can put a link to those as well.
Wonderful. We will do that. Thank you, John, so much. And then
You're
we will see you all in a couple weeks.
Have a good holiday.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks.